Day service, down the street, Memorial Day service. Memorial Day service.
What are you passing out today here at Memorial Day in Boston?
We're having a Memorial Day service for the soldiers who died in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we're making the people aware that the war is still going on, and the troops should be brought home immediately, if not sooner, to prevent more soldiers from dying. This is the Veterans for Peace organization in Boston, the Smedley Butler Brigade.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And a few years ago, we wanted to have a Memorial Day event that was very meaningful. I think a lot of us were tired of maybe respectful events at cemeteries and then culminating in parades and things like that very often are very militaristic, flyovers and parachute jumps and those kinds of things. And so we wanted to do something that was very respectful and something that was meaningful to us, all of us who've lost loved ones, who've lost comrades, who've lost family members, for the Iraqis who've lost family members and loved ones, and so that's why we put this together, and thank you all for coming, and thank you everyone, too numerous to count, who have assisted in putting this together. In the beginning, I would just like to take a moment of silence. I'm going to call out 4 names, if everyone could repeat presente. These are 4 members who we have lost of Veterans for Peace in the last year. First is Captain Paul Brailsford. Presente. John Marcy. Presente. David Driscoll. Presente. Brian Arredondo. Presente. One of the things we wanted to do this year was focus on the incident and the issue about suicide. As a Vietnam veteran, suicide was prevalent during Vietnam. I've lost 2 of my friends. One that I went to intelligence school with and served in Vietnam with and was with for 1.5 years afterwards. 3 months after getting out of the service, he drove his car off a cliff in California. I had another friend, and that's Norm Garber, better known as Spider-Man to us. And another friend, Tom Nolan, who I grew up with, hung out at his house all the time, joined the Air Force. 2 years ago, he jumped off an overpass in California. I'm an RN. I did work at the VA for a while, and I went to a suicide prevention workshop, a training last year, and a woman who was giving that said that there was 1,000 veterans that committed suicide. I raised my hand and I said, "How did you know it was 1,000? Where did you get that number?" She said, "Those are the veterans that are associated with the VA. We have them in our system." I said, "Well, most of the vets that I know are not affiliated with the VA in terms of getting treatment or medications or whatever the case, so they're not in your system." So I said, "What you're saying is really that the numbers could be 3, 4, 5, 6,000. And she said, "Yes, they have no idea." We wanted to bring an attention to the suicide this year, for this, and it's extremely difficult to get the names, because the military doesn't want to give you the names. There was a 2-star general that was quoted on TV today, a quote that he said in the past, and he said, that it's a cowardly thing, and when they commit suicide, they make a mess, and we've got to clean up their mess. That's what he said. That's a quote from this general. That's the attitude in the military. You can't, and then the attitude in civilians and the families. If you look in the newspaper, it'll say sudden death, or John Smith died at home, but they don't give the reason why. It's very difficult to find that. So, and we did the best we could. But there's one thing, that the incidence of suicide in Afghanistan and Iraq is going up. Even though they have all these things in place. And what is the cause for that? Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan is a little different in that you have IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm just going to read this quickly and then we'll move on with the program. It was a 27-year-old Marine who was trying to adjust to life, and he the common story, and he started drinking and is having problems, headaches, forgetting things, filing for divorce and all this kind of stuff. Committed suicide. On autopsy of this young man's brain may have been historic. It revealed something startling that may shed light on the epidemic of suicides and other troubles experienced by veterans of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is from the New York Times, by the way. His brain had been physically changed by a disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. That's a degenerative condition best known for affecting boxers, football players, and other athletes who endure repeated blows to the head. In people with CTE, an abnormal form of protein accumulates and eventually destroys cells throughout the brain, including the frontal and temporal lobes. Those are areas that regulate impulse control, judgment, multitasking, memory, and emotions. Could blasts from bombs or grenades have catastrophic impacts similar to those of repeated concussions in sports? And could the rash of suicides among young veterans be the result? PTSD is a high-risk cohort like war veterans, could actually be physical disease from permanent brain damage, not psychological disease. Kevin Lucy. Kevin and his wife, Joyce, lost their son Jeffrey, USMC Corporal Jeffrey Lucy, to suicide, and we love this family, and it's very painful, but they've never stopped working towards helping to resolve, helping other families, and helping to get the U.S. military and the government to pay closer attention. They were instrumental in making that happen, and they worked tirelessly, essentially for other families, so that they don't have to go through the pain and anguish that their family has gone through. And I'd like to introduce Kevin Lucy.
First of all, I'd like to express my wife's apology for not being here. Jeffy's mom has some minor health problems. 8 years ago, this very night was the night that we brought Jeff to the VA. We thought that we had secured a place in the arms of angels for him, and regretfully we found out just the opposite. He was, in 1999, a young 18-year-old reservist who wanted to go into the toughest, and he joined the United States Marines without our knowledge. He just came home and spraying it on us. Then, when September 11th, 2001 occurred, I remember him coming through the door and saying, "This doesn't look good." And so he was deployed on January 14th, 2003. And he went over to Kuwait and then participated in the invasion. We don't know what happened. He never shared the stories until his last few days. And then those stories we found to be unbelievable. But he struggled. Jeff became our most important teacher, because we could see the evil of war. It had planted a cancer in Jeff's soul, in Jeff's spirit, and we just saw him dying before us. And on June 21st, 2004, I remember coming home and Jeff was in a fury. He was in a rage. He never got mad at us, but he was in a furious rage, and he even showed me how he was going to end his life, take the pain away that no one else wanted to. In fact, in the Vet Center's records, it has a direct quote from Jeff, and it said that he told the vet counselor, "No one cares enough to help." Later that night, Jeff came to me, a 5'11" Marine, and he asked if he could sit in my lap and if we could rock, like he did when he was a young child. Within 24 hours later, he was in my lap for the final time as I was taking his bloodied body down from the beams of our home. This should not have happened to my son. This should never have happened to a veteran of this country.
He tirelessly works for the chapter and was at Occupy Boston every day. Bob has served 2 tours in Vietnam, has 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, and a tour full of other medals. And now he works for peace full time, and at least in his heart. And I'd like to welcome Bob Funk.
Good afternoon, everybody. First thing I'd like to do is thank everyone for being here and tell you I love you all. You are beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Excuse me. What Memorial Day means to me is when I did a little research on this, history is all wrong. They got it all wrong. Memorial Day was swiped by a couple of Union generals, originally called Decoration Day. The original Memorial Day was a mere 2 weeks after Lincoln was assassinated, on the 1st of May of 1865 in Charleston, South Carolina. Freedmen, or former slaves, cleared out an area where 237 Union soldiers had been buried after being captured and held in a Confederate POW camp. They cleared out the area, disinterred the Union soldiers, gave them a proper burial, and on the 1st of May of 1865, 10,000 people showed up for these 237 men who had passed away, who had died for their country. Out of that, 3,000 of those were children who were going to school for the first time. They were the children of the freedmen. 10,000 people showed up on that first Memorial Day. Afterwards, it was eventually taken away until in the 1870s, virtually every state had some form, and in 1968, we finally changed it into a federal holiday. Now, what Memorial Day means to me is the loss of my brothers and sisters, both physically and mentally, in ways that many of us cannot understand. Those of us who have stood through this know that there are no words to describe combat. You just kind of know. You can search for them forever. You can dig through his thesaurus, and the words just don't exist. So it's very difficult for me to speak of this. One man I held was shot in the head. Left portion was taken off. We were in a firefight. I was hanging on to him, and he kept calling me Mom. And he died in my arms. And for 30 seconds, I was his mother. And I was proud to be his mother. And I wrote to his mother. As you can tell, it kind of affects me a little. Just as every time I hear taps, I know that one of my brothers and sisters has moved on before me. The Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force have militarized Memorial Day. I guess I have too, in a way, to which I apologize. For Memorial Day is a day when we should remember those who, of their own volition, in most cases, stood where others would not stand, tread where others feared to go, to bring about the better angels of our nature in the hopes that we would have peace, and we should all be working towards peace. I usually don't quote things, but I'd like to give this quote. This came from a Washington Post editorial this morning, and it sums it up pretty good. Memorial Day was not then and is not today about victories won, national glory, or the greatness of armed forces. It is essentially the fulfillment of a personal obligation to remember to say of someone who we knew or loved, or whose name we read on a plaque, or whose troubled face we see in a long ago documentary film. You lost all, or nearly all, before your time had come, but you shall not be forgotten. Let us remember those who have gone on before us, and let us, the living, move towards peace and get away from these stinking wars. Thank you.
Is if people could line up right here by the, just make a line. People are familiar how we've done this in the past. And we're going to call out each name of the fallen soldiers from Massachusetts who have died in Iraq or Afghanistan. We will also be calling out, mixed in those names, young men who have committed suicide from Massachusetts. And then when we're done with that, then the Iraqis will come up and read some of their loved ones, and we'll do the same thing. When the name is called, we will ring a bell, then everyone would say presente, and the first person there would go up and take a carnation off the table and go and drop it in the harbor in memory of that person. Okay?
Specialist Scott A. Andrews, Fall River, Army. Presente. Lance Corporal Alexander Scott Arredondo, Randolph, Marines. Presente. Sergeant James Ayube, Salem, Army. Presente. Specialist David J. Babineau, Springfield, Army. Presente.